Okay. Well, thank you everyone for coming. Apologize for the delay. We tried to get a Google Hangout working, but no luck. Those of you who have looked at the cake got a sneak preview of all of the names. Those of you who are at the bris heard that the Hebrew name for our son is Yechezkel Aluf Nachshon Broniatowski Halevi. The secular name is Judah Moses Broniatowski. And I'm going to go through and sort of give a little bit of an overview of why we chose these names. And thank you all for coming. So I appreciate you all honoring us with your presence here. So many of you were here just about 16 months ago when we had the Simchat Bat for our daughter Elaine Irmgard, who's Chedva Bruria. And at the time, before I went into sort of a description about the actual names themselves, I spoke a lot about the importance of names and the roles that the parents play in choosing the names, in the sense that they reflect our aspirations for our children. And so at the time, I had justified this discussion with a reference to the fact that her birth parsha was Shemot, which of course means names. And so it makes some sense to look at what the parsha for our son's birth is. He was born on May 23rd, which is a couple of days after Shavuot, during the week of Parshat Naso. So Naso is in Sefer Bamidbar, which roughly translated is in the wilderness, but people often call it Numbers. So we have names and numbers. Anyway, furthermore, Naso refers to the act of taking a census or a count. And some of you may be perhaps wondering if I sort of contemplated naming our son 42, only very briefly. But the point here is that Hebrew is kind of a multivalent language, and the words are subject to multiple interpretations depending on how you place the vowels. And so the word Bamidbar, with just a few minor vowel changes, becomes B'medaber, with speech. And the word Naso comes from the same root as Nasi, or prince, or the leader of the tribes of Israel, in particular the leader of the tribe of Judah, who was the primary, the leadership tribe, the tribe from which King David descended. So how are we to know which interpretation is correct? The key point here is that context matters. It's not enough to just look at the word in isolation. You have to know its context, how it's used. And so that's a little bit what I want to talk about today, because this is one of our jobs as parents. Maybe one of the most straightforward ways that we raise our children is to tell them what's right and wrong, to sort of give them the rules, and to give them a recipe for how they should live their lives. But rules can be brittle, and living successfully is not something that's generally done by cookbook. Our children have to be able to contextualize and to interpret situations in order to determine what's appropriate given the circumstances. And I think this is nowhere more evident than in Parsha Naso, which on its face seems to be full of a bunch of rituals and practices that we can't do anymore, for the large part, because the context has changed. We don't anymore have a temple or a mishkan. The rituals of Sota and Nazir are no longer practiced by most people. And most Jews don't know their tribal identities. They don't know what tribes they came from. And so we still read the Parsha, and we darshan it every year. We try to recontextualize it. And this is, in a sense, a tension underlying Parsha Naso, and it's the nature of the challenge that we respond to when we're choosing names for our children. So you've now heard our son's Hebrew name, Yechezkel Aluf Nachshon. We chose the name Yechezkel after my great-grandfather on my father's side, Chaskel Broniatowski. His name was also Yechezkel. Chaskel Broniatowski was the owner of the Fischl soap factory in Częstochowa. He was quite an observant Jew. He woke up every morning at 5:30 to study Gemara. It was a ritual of his. And he was remembered by those who knew him as stern and serious, and very much sort of a representative of the old world. He was born in 1865. My grandfather was the youngest of 11. 64. He was born in 1864, not 1964. But he nevertheless valued secular education, and he paid for most of his children to attend universities throughout Europe. which was something that was rather unique at the time. As I mentioned, our son was born during Parsha Naso, and my great-grandfather, like me, was a Levi, or rather me like him. And so too is his great-grandson. And so in a sense, it makes sense to sort of do a little bit of a census. And I apologize if this is a little bit depressing, but I think it's important to set the context. One of the most noted things about Chaskel is that he and his wife I mentioned that they had 11 children. They actually had 16 children. My grandfather was the 15th of 16. Of those 16 who were born in pre-war Poland, infant mortality rates were rather high. 11 made it to adulthood. Of those, only 5 of them survived the Shoah. Okay? So Chaskel had 16 children in in his great-great-grandson's generation. There are 8. Excuse me. So to take a little bit of a step back, if not for the Shoah, the key is that they could legitimately have numbered in the thousands. So the question is, how do we proceed in the scope of this kind of a loss? And I think that there's something to be said about the ritual of Nazir, of asceticism. It gives us a clue because there's a commentary on this ritual that describes how people respond to loss. So in Bava Batra 60b, Rabbi Yehoshua discouraged the practice of Nazirut and abstaining from wine. And there was a Baraita that taught that when the Romans destroyed the Second Temple, there were large numbers of Judeans who became Nazirim, and they committed to not eating meat or drinking wine. And Rabbi Yehoshua asked them, well, look, if you don't eat meat or you don't drink wine, why is it that you have bread? Because, well, okay, we don't have the altar where you would make a sacrifice, but there are also meal offerings, right? So you really shouldn't be having bread either. And they said, well, okay, fine, we won't have bread. And they said, but wait a minute. There's also the fruit offering, the bikurim. And so that means you shouldn't have fruit either. And they say, okay, well, we won't have fruit either. They say, okay, but what about water? Because there was a ceremony on Sukkot of pouring water. And so at that point they said, you know what? We can't answer that. We don't have an answer to that. So the conclusion here, Rabbi Yehoshua taught them that it's not possible not to mourn. Obviously, we should mourn. The temple was destroyed. But to mourn too much is also impossible. Because we shouldn't impose on the community a hardship that the majority of them can't observe. And I think there's a lesson in that. We can't live our life mourning for those who are lost. We have to look to the future. And this is the essence of the name Yechezkel, God strengthens, which is actually the Haftarah for Shavuot, 2 days before the baby was born. And so some of you may be familiar with the parable of the dry bones and the revivification of the dry bones. And so I'll just briefly say it over. We do this for our children. So Tanya Rabbi Eliezer Omer, Metim shehecheya Yechezkel amdu al raglehem ve'amru shira v'metu. Mashirav amru, Hashem memit betzedek u'mechaya berachamim. Rabbi Yehoshua Omer shirazo amaru, Hashem memit u'mechaya morid she'ol ve'ya'al. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, emet mashal haya, amar lo Rabbi Nechemia, im emet lama mashal, im mashal lama emet, ela be'emet mashal haya. Okay, so the punchline, I'll only get to that last sentence here. Rabbi Yehuda says, discusses the situation in which a number of dry bones were brought back to life. And then they said a psalm, and then they were gone. But there's another opinion that they stayed alive. And so Rabbi Yehuda says, well, okay, it's true. This was just a parable. To whom Rabbi Nechemia responded, if it's true, why do we call it a parable? And if it's a parable, how can we say that it's true? In truth, it was a parable. Be'emet mashal haya. In fact, it was a parable. Rabbi Eliezer beno shel Rabbi Yossi Haglili Omer, Meitim shehechei Yechezkel, alu le'eretz Yisrael, ve'nasu nashim ve'holidu banim uvanot. Amad Rabbi Yehuda ben Batera al Raglav ve'amar, Ani bin mibnei vnehem ve'halalu tfilin shehiniach li avi abba mehem. Okay, so Rabbi Eliezer, the son of Rabbi Yossi Haglili, said, the dead who were brought back to life by Yechezkel went to the land of Israel. And they married women there, and they had children, sons and daughters. Rabbi Yehuda stood up, and he said, Rabbi Yehuda ben Betera stood up on his legs, and he said, I'm from the children of their children, and I wear the tefillin that my father's fathers wore. Okay? So this isn't just a parable. They lived, right? And so this is often interpreted in the sense that people were in exile in Babylon. And when they were revivified, the parable is that they were brought back to life. But another way to interpret this is that their spirit was revivified. They were able to return to Israel and to reestablish the life that they had lost. And so Yechezkel therefore represents to us a link to our past, to traditions, but also a vision for the future, a vision of strength and renewal. But then the question comes about, how do we achieve this future? And this is reflected in our son's second name, which is actually a compound name, Aluf Nachshon, after Rebecca's paternal grandfather, Olaf Newman Begtrup. The first name, Olaf, is Old Norse name. That means descendant of our ancestors, which is to say a link in the chain. The Hebrew word aluf means champion or leader of thousands. In the Israeli army, the highest rank is the Rav Aluf, the chief of staff. If Yechezkel could have had thousands of descendants in our son's generation, then it could be that our son could have thousands of descendants. And so I want to say a little bit about Olaf Newman Tuni Begtrup. He grew up in Iowa. He graduated from Iowa State University, and he was an engineer at Hughes Aircraft for 27 years until he retired. And he was a singer. He was active in singing in his community's choir. He was a fan of wildlife, trains, cars, building and designing rooms, houses and garages, music, hummingbirds, swimming, his family, arm wrestling, Norway, telling stories, speed punching his punching bag, watches, cruises, weird figurines, stuffed armadillos, watching people's behavior, making people snicker, which you should be at this point, correcting people's grammar, and here's an interesting thing, having people punch him in the stomach as hard as he could. He was a strong man, which dovetails nicely with God strengthens. And he was deeply committed to his wife, his family, and his community. And his second name, Newman, means literally new man. Although he is linked to our ancestors, our son is a new man and has to face the challenges that a new age is going to bring him. And we hope that a link to his ancestors will root him in this new age. And we chose to translate Newman into Hebrew as Nachshon, after Nachshon ben Aminadav. Aminadav, who is the father of the biblical Nachshon, the word Aminadav means my ancestors are noble. Ami, my nation is noble. Nachshon was a direct descendant of Judah, the biblical Judah, who was the Nasi. And Nachshon, in Parshat Naso, is the first to bring a sacrifice to the newly consecrated Mishkan. And Nachshon was also the direct ancestor of King David through Boaz and Ruth, who are commemorated on Shavuot. And so the question then comes down to, what does the name Nachshon mean? And this is actually something that I've been sort of struggling with for years, and only yesterday kind of figured out. I worried about this because the root of Nachshon sounds a lot like Nachash, which means snake. And clearly, one of the most venerated leaders in Jewish tradition is not named after the animal that sort of triggered the expulsion from the Garden of Eden. So I did a little bit of research. Nachshon is actually the name for a bird, the African snake bird. Rebecca made sure that I emphasize that it's African. The Anhegarufa, which is an 80 centimeter long, sort of cormorant-like fish-eating species, with a very long neck that tends to swim through the water with its neck sticking above the water and looks a little bit like a snake. So therefore the name snakebird. So why was Nachshon named a snakebird? What does that mean? Well, you can think about the visual imagery of somebody down in the water with their neck sticking out, up to their neck in the Red Sea. There's an Agada on this as well, and it's rather long, so I'll get to the relevant point. Amar lo Rabbi Yehuda lo kachayamase. So there's a previous story about two tribes fighting over who would get to go first, but this is the opinion people typically go with. Ein ani yored tchila layam v'zeh omer ein ani yored tchila layam. All the different tribes were sitting around the Red Sea. The Egyptians were closing in on them in war chariots, and they're sitting there and they're trapped between chariots and this body of water. And they're all saying to each other, "You go first." "No, you go first." "I'm not going first," right? As they were all sort of trying to get each other to go first, Kafat Nachshon ben Aminadav vayared layam tchila, jumped up Nachshon ben Aminadav, and he went first down into the sea. At the same time, at that exact time, Moshe, the Moses, was engaging in prayer. Amarlo HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to him, Hashem said to him, Yedidai tovim bayam, ve'ata omed umar bedri tefila lefanai. My beloved ones are in the sea, and here you are in front of me in prayer. Amar lefanav, ribono she'olam, uma biyadai la'asot. Creator of the world, master of the world, what should I be doing? Amar lo, daber el bnei Yisrael ve'sa'u, ve'ata harem et matedcha. He said to him, speak to the children of Israel, and tell them to run down into the sea, and you raise up your staff. Vagomer, etc. Lefichach zacha Yehuda la'asot memshala be'Yisrael shene'emar hayta Yehuda lekodsho Yisrael mamshelotav. Mata'am hayta Yehuda lekodsho ve'Yisrael mamshelotav mishum shehayam ra'avayanos. Okay, so therefore Yehuda, the tribe from which Nachshon was descended, merited to have leadership in Israel. As it is said, Yehuda had the kedusha, the holiness, and Israel was his had the rulership, the kingship. So what's the meaning of Hayta Yehuda lekodsho Yisrael lemamshelotav? What's the meaning of this? Mishum shehayam ra'avayanos. It comes from the sea saw and split, right, and ran. So the children of Israel saw the staff, ran down into the sea. Nachshon was standing there up into his neck. And as soon as everyone started running down, as soon as Nachshon became not just a zealous individual, but a leader, then the sea split and everybody went through on dry land. Okay. So, unlike many other water birds, the feathers of the African darter, the Nachshon, don't contain any oil. They're not waterproof. Okay, so it's actually entirely possible that the Nachshon could have drowned in the sea. So his life, if not for these actions, could have been endangered. He wasn't a natural floater. So the name Nachshon embodies courage. It embodies initiative in the face of uncertainty and change. And so there's the Yiddish expression to be a Nachshon. That means to be an initiator, somebody who leads to change. He's a new man for a new age. So we have a linkage here between the old and the new. But we also have a tradition in my family of using different secular names from the Hebrew names. So our son's secular name is Judah Moses Broniatowski. And so you can see the parallels. We choose the name Judah not only because of its direct reference to Nachshon, but after Rebecca's uncle Herbie, that's to say Herbert Julius Goldblatt, whose Hebrew name was Yehuda Hesh. I mentioned that one of the primary duties of parents is to set the context in which the child is raised. And so this is something in which Uncle Herbie excelled. He was a raconteur, a storyteller, who would always be able to captivate Rebecca with his stories about the family and his life. He had lots of stories, for example, about his service in World War II, where he served in the American Army in Africa. But what was most impressed upon Rebecca was his personalities. He was a humble person, competent, and very easy to underestimate, sort of like somebody I know. He was kind, loving, patient, and had a big heart. And his behavior set a context that Rebecca was inspired to emulate, and she looked up to him. And then finally, to wrap it up, our child is named Moses. So how can a child be born right after receiving the Torah and not be named Moses? But in all seriousness, we named him Moses after Mose Hartman, my maternal grandmother's maternal grandfather. Mose was also a pioneer in the New World. He was born and raised in Barchfeld, in Thuringia in Germany, and he established himself as a successful businessman in Little Rock, Arkansas. A very different environment. He had several siblings and came to the U.S. with his two brothers, Gus and Lee. Lee, incidentally, is the person after whom the town Leland, Mississippi is named. So if you were into Kermit the Frog, he's from Leland, Mississippi. Mose was a versatile man. In Germany, he was one of three Jewish cattle dealers in Barchfeld, and later in Ilmenau, before he immigrated to the U.S. And when he came to the U.S. with his brothers, all three brothers were in business together, and they owned a cattle feed store. And later, he owned a hotel in Barchfeld. So you say he adapted to his environment. He was resilient, and he was able to seamlessly transition from the old to the new. My grandmother remembers that he loved playing cards, he loved dominoes, and he loved dancing, waltz especially. And he spoke a beautiful dialect of German, and he loved music. He was able to embody this blend between the world of the old, in his particular case, Jewish Germany in the 1880s, and the New World, America. So, our son's name, the secular name, is Judah, representing the Nasi of Israel, a kind, loving, patient, and courageous leader, as Rabbi Walter said in his drash a few weeks ago, able to admit when he was wrong, which is something that I think we all hope for people we really truly love and care about. It's something that we all struggle with. Moses was Ish haya anav meod, the most humble man. Mose Hartman was also fun-loving, adaptable, and resilient. Yechezkel, God strengthens. Strong, guided by traditions and values, eager to learn, able to provide. Aluf, meaning champion, leader of thousands, strong and devoted, and a link in that chain. And finally, Nachshon, innovative, novel, willing to take risks, and a new man. So thank you all very much for coming, and please enjoy.